Hello, I want to welcome you to the Introduction to Transana webinar this morning. I just want to let you know that I am recording today's session. I record all of my webinar sessions so that I can watch them later and make improvements to them as we go. And sometimes people who aren't able to make it to the webinar have to see the recordings, and I like to have those on hand for when that happens. How's everybody doing today? My name is David Woods, and I am the developer and publisher of Transana. And what I'm going to do is spend the next hour doing a quick overview of Transana, what the program is like, what the program can do. I'm going to be focusing primarily on working with video data because I'm convinced that if you know how to work with video data in Transana, you can figure out the other simpler forms of data. Video is more complicated than other forms of data. There's just more that you can do with it, and it requires a little bit more attention in a couple of cases. So you can all see my screen, I hope. And what you're seeing is Transana in its form when I first started up. I've got a practice database loaded so that I can demonstrate some things for you, but I will be showing you how to put data in as well. So first off, let me just go ahead and open up a sample of data in Transana. And I'll play a little bit of the video for you.
This is the core they started with, and they want it to look like that. I'm going to first flip it up. Watch what happens. Okay? Now I'm going to go back to where we started, and now I'm going to flip it down. What happens each time?
It goes to the same
Flipping
thing.
it up, or
So you can see that Transana divides the data up into multiple parts to make it easier to work with. In the upper right-hand corner, we have our media window. That's where we display video when we have video data. If we have audio-only data, the media window still provides this controller bar that allows us to pause and play the video, that allows us to reposition in the audio. When we have video data, there's a button here that allows us to capture screenshots from the video and integrate those into our data as well. And so the media window has an obvious role when working with media data. In the lower left-hand corner here, we have our document window, and we can see at the moment there is a transcript that is linked to that video. You noticed as the video was playing, there was a highlight in the transcript that was moving along with that video, and that linkage between the transcript and the media file is very, very useful. One of the basic philosophies built into Transana is that when you are analyzing media data, the media is your data and the transcript is a tool to help you analyze that data, but it is not a replacement for your data. When I do lit reviews, I come across many articles that say we recorded interviews and we created transcripts from those interviews, and then we threw away the interviews and we analyzed the transcripts. And I think that that is a poor analytic process because there is a whole layer of data in the media file that is very, very difficult to capture in a transcript. Intonation, inflection, body language, gesture, facial expression. There's a whole ton of information embedded in the media file that you've collected. And why would you want to throw that away? Sometimes that gives you valuable information about your data. And so as I say, I consider the transcript a tool to help you work with your data. And one of the ways that a transcript is a useful tool is it provides a map. It's really hard when you just have a screenshot from the video and you're scrolling back and forth and you're trying to find that one spot where the one kid said the one thing. You're probably going to have a difficult time finding that. But with a transcript, it's very easy. I know that there's a discussion of symmetry somewhere in this, so I can type in the root of the word, and Transana will go through, and I can find the spot that I'm looking for, and I can jump immediately to that spot in the video.
And Amanda, while she was listening to the story, said, "What's symmetrical?" Let's talk about that word, symmetrical. Who can
So I can use the transcript as a way to find the spot in the media file that I'm looking for. There are other uses for the transcript as well, of course, but that's where we'll start. When you're working with text-only data, it shows up in the document window as well, and you just don't have anything in the media window to work with text-only data. Above the document window is the visualization window. You can see that it shows a waveform diagram, a visualization of the audio portion of a media file, and that can be really useful during transcription and in some ways during analysis as well. But it also shows the coding that I've done to this particular file so far. Make that just a little bit bigger, show a little bit more of the coding. And you can see that as I hold my mouse over each of these colored bars, Transana tells me what the code is that has been applied. And so that code has been applied to a particular portion of the media file. And if I'm interested in that cluster of codes, I can select that in my visualization window.
Is that quote symmetric?
And I can watch the portion of the video that's coded this particular way. So it again gives me that ability to connect the coding that I see in the visualization window with the media file where that coding is anchored. And last but not least, in the lower right-hand corner, we have the data window. The data window is where we control things in Transana. It's where we bring new data in. It's where we display the data that we have visible. It's where we do a lot of the work of Transana that is different from creating and understanding the transcripts and looking at the media file. So a lot of coding happens in the data window. A lot of reporting happens in the data window, those kinds of things. We see that the data window is divided up into 4 categories initially. Libraries are for raw data. When we bring data into Transana, we put it in a library. A library is simply a way of grouping data together. So I have a number of different data sources or data from different studies that I've brought together for demonstrating things during the webinar, and each one gets its own library. So I can keep my data sorted and organized. And if you have a small study where you've got, a half a dozen or fewer videos, you probably don't need the library concept. But I've worked with projects that have upwards of 12 or 15,000 hours worth of video. And when you have that much data to work with, you really need to be able to organize it. So libraries allow you to organize your raw data when you bring it in. All right, next is collections. When one does qualitative analysis, one makes selections in larger pieces of data, whether it's media data or text data, whether it's PDFs or still images or whatever. One makes selections and indicates what is analytically interesting or significant about those selections. And so I refer to those selections as analytic data. Analytic data goes into collections. There are a number of different ways that one works with Transana to make sense out of that analytic data, and that all happens in this collections area. It is common with qualitative analysis to create a coding scheme. One does that under keywords in Transana. One can create coding schemes that describe your data in lots of different ways, and that's very useful. And one of the tools one uses in making sense out of coded data is a search. There are other tools as well, but the search gets its own section, because when one does a search, for example, if you've got data that is in the form of coded selections from video, if you do a search in Transana, what Transana returns as a result of that search is coded segments of video, and this allows you to manipulate those and organize those and understand those in a way that's very similar to the rest of the data window. So those are Transana's 4 main windows. There are some additional windows as well. If you're working with PDF data, PDFs, because formatting can be analytically significant, because layout is an important part of the PDF document. The PDF gets its own pop-up window that allows you to analyze PDFs outside of the main four windows of Transana. If you're working with still images, there are a number of characteristics of still images and working with still image data that don't quite fit into the four main windows. And so still images are handled in a pop-up window. Most reports come as pop-up windows as well. But this is the basic starting point for Transana. This is where it all begins. So I see that there is a question in the chat. Will the recording be emailed? I can send out a link to the recording when it's done. It usually takes about an hour to get the video processed and posted. So I will send out a link to the recording probably an hour or so after the webinar is over. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the overview of Transana, what it looks like, how the pieces work together. Let's talk about how one brings data into Transana. You've got all of this data, you want to bring it in and start working to analyze it. And again, I'm going to talk about video, but the process is very similar with other types of data. So the first thing one does with Transana is one creates a library. You need to have a place to put your data. You can organize it this way. So I'm going to go ahead and create a library, and I'm going to just call that library my webinar library. A tremendously creative name, I know, but I find that I can either give you creative names or I can speak in a way that is relatively fluid. I don't seem to be able to do both at the same time when doing these webinars, so I tend to use names like webinar library. So I've created a library. I now have a place to bring data in. And so I'm going to right-click that new library. And you see, if I want to bring in text data or PDF data, I would select this menu item. If I wanted to bring in media data, I could choose this next item, add episode as Transana's language for bring in media data. We see that there's an option for importing media data with automated transcripts. And that's the one that I will show you in a second. We see import spreadsheet data. We see batch document and batch episode creation and a bunch of other options. So Transana has a lot of different choices depending on what it is you want to do. So what I want to do is I'm going to choose import media files with automated transcripts. I want to bring in about a dozen files for some research that I'm doing. They're relatively small files because nobody wants to sit around and watch Transana bring in data for a long time. So I'm going to come here to this particular set of files that I've gathered together, and I'm going to choose about a dozen files there. Those files are in English, so I'm going to select the language. I'm going to select a particular model for automated transcription. I'm going to tell Transana to use the GPU on my computer for faster automated transcription of those. I'm going to tell Transana to put in a time code every sentence. I'll talk about time codes in a minute and why they're important. And I'm not going to have Transana do any speaker identification because these are all single speaker videos, so I don't really need that. And I'm going to add those dozen videos to my my transcription queue. So you can specify a whole set of files that you want to bring in and what you want those imports to look like. And then I'm going to hit process transcription queue. Now, the reason for the concept of the transcription queue is that if you're working with hour-long files, each of those transcripts takes a little while to get put together. And this system allows Transana to do that work in the background while you're working on other things. Once you get that first file transcribed, you can start doing analysis of that first file while Transana is plugging away at all of the other files that you've specified. So that's the general model. This allows you to bring data in the background while you're doing other work with Transana, because automated transcription sometimes takes some time to accomplish. Now, these are all very short files, so this will happen relatively quickly. And I am just going to now select process my transcription queue. I'm going to tell Transana to go ahead and actually do the work behind those dozen files I've specified. And Transana, you can see quite quickly because these files are small, is going through and it is creating automated transcripts for each of those. So let's take a look at what one of those files might look like. Now we see that Transana does color coding of automated transcription. It gives you its own indication of the confidence that it has in the precision with which it's been able to do automated transcription. I am a firm believer that an automated transcript is a rough draft. You should never try and analyze an automated transcript without reviewing it first, comparing it to your media file, because automated transcription, while saves you a tremendous amount of time getting started, you have to check it for accuracy. I found instances where the automated transcript says exactly the opposite of what is in the media file. And so your first step is to review those automated transcripts, to correct them, to make sure that they are in fact accurate. And so the way we can do that is I'll just play each sentence.
I'm a Windows guy who's changed to Macintosh, yeah.
We see that that was correct, so I'm just going to use this to set the formatting to all black to remove the color coding as a way of indicating that that what I've got there is correct. That's odd. I'm going to play this next segment.
Everything about it was just so much simpler than what I was used to, having used Windows for so long.
And that's correct. We can go through. I happen to know the others are all correct until we get to this last line.
My name is Aaron Adams, and I'm a Windows LAN administrator.
He's not a land administrator. He's a LAN or network administrator. So we're going to correct that, and we're going to correct the color. I don't know why I'm getting this hyperlink message. I was messing with something earlier related to hyperlinks, and apparently that's gotten stuck. So I've made my corrections. Now, what I do as a common practice is when I've gone through and reviewed a transcript and made sure that it's corrected, I remove that header. That's my signal to myself that this transcript hasn't just been automated. Transcript hasn't just been transcribed by the program, but that I've gone through and checked it for accuracy. So this is a transcript that's now ready for me to work with, and I can go through all those other transcripts and do that as well. So you can see that Transana uses automated transcription as a way of getting you started in the process of working with your data. So I am going to, now these ads are nice for demonstrating bringing in bulk data, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring in another file. I'm going to bring this one in using a different method to show that different method, but this is the one that we're actually going to pay some attention to during the webinar. So I'm going to add an episode, that is to say I'm going to import a media file, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to select that media file on my hard drive, and I'm going to say, okay, I am going to do something here. This particular media file is a mathematics lesson. So I'm going to go to my math concepts codes, and I'm going to choose the geometry code, and I'm going to apply this geometry code to this particular video as I bring it in. What that does, the reason I'm doing that is that all of the selections that I make from this video will automatically have that geometry code suggested as a default code for everything that I create from this, so that when I go back and I want to search, if I want to find stuff related to this particular lesson or related lessons, I can search on that geometry code and find that, as opposed to lessons about algebra or lessons about history or lessons about languages or whatever else might be in my database, whatever other data I have. So this allows me to isolate this particular lesson as being a geometry lesson, and I am going to go ahead and choose to do automated transcription again. We see that Transana actually offers two methods of automated transcription. One is an embedded tool. The data never leaves your computer. It's very, very secure. and safe so that the most confidential data can be analyzed with this method with no risk of exposure of your data. But this method is a little bit more complicated and a little bit slower to do its work. There's also a tool that is a server-based tool, an external tool. Transana has to send a copy of your audio out to this tool for processing. If we select the Speechmatics option, you better check with your IRB before you do that. Some data is so confidential that they will not allow that external processing of that. Speechmatics is a paid service while Faster Whisper is free, but Speechmatics is a lot faster and is simpler to use in that the two models that it offers are both very high quality and produce really, really good results. Whereas sometimes Faster Whisper results work and sometimes there are issues and you need to retranscribe using a different model. I'm going to select Faster Whisper. So I go through and this is the step. These are the steps that Transana goes through to create the transcripts. So I've got my specification that I want. Now I've actually already done the processing on this, which is why it went so fast. Otherwise, that would take about a minute to run. And so now I have my additional sample, and that has demonstrated what it's like to bring in a single file with a less automated system for creating that automated transcript. Now you can do manual transcription as well. There are a number of reasons that one would want to do manual transcription, even in the days where automated transcription is an option. If you're doing a nonverbal transcript, for example, there are people who use Transana to analyze data of animal behavior or dance or something else that's very, very visual, and an automated transcript of animal behavior doesn't make any sense. So they create manual transcripts that document what it is that's in their media files that they're wishing to study. So I'm now going to load this, and we see that in fact what I have is, I'm going to restart Transana. That message is getting annoying. I don't know what's going on with that. I will look into that afterwards. I'm actually running a version of Transana that's not available yet because I was doing some programming work on it, and it may be that I have created a bug in that, and that's what's happening there. That would be unfortunate, but it happens. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to load my video.
This is the core they started with, and they want it to look like that. This is the core they started.
And so I haven't had time to go through and correct that transcript yet. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to add another transcript, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to pick one that I have already edited. Ready to go. So that's the process of bringing data into Transana. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to analyzing that data, making sense out of that data? Does that all make sense? I didn't show it, but the Faster Whisper model supports about 100 different languages. I can't really tell you much about the quality of the transcription in other languages. I am unfortunately monolingual. My understanding is that at least in the few languages that people have used that I've talked with them about, yeah, it does a pretty good job. The issue of media files with mixed languages, with multiple languages, that is an evolving field right now. The newest release of Transana, which was a little over a week ago, introduced the first mixing of languages that worked. I find it works with some language pairs. It doesn't work very well with others. I was playing with some English and Chinese data yesterday, and it wasn't working very well. There's a note in the chat. Somebody was trying to work with Spanish data, but kept getting transcripts into English anyway. Carlos, if you want to stay at the end of the webinar, we can explore that a little bit. I have some ideas for things that you can do to try and address that. That particular issue. At any rate, there are lots of language options, and I'm not quite sure what's up with Carlos's Spanish, because I have certainly seen people use Transana successfully in Spanish language data and get the Spanish transcripts they were after. Okay, so let's move on to making sense out of the data that we've brought in. As I said earlier, the process of qualitative analysis, at least at its very, very base level, really consists of making selections in the data and applying information to those selections that indicate what is analytically important or meaningful about them, and then manipulating those selections to be able to make sense out of data. So one of the options in Transana is coding. You can create a coding scheme. And so this is data about classroom. So I have some codes for math concepts, and I have some codes for teaching techniques, because this is curriculum development, but we're looking both at what's happening in the math class and what concepts are being taught, but also what are the moves that the teacher is making to convey information and to teach the students. Those are the two things that we're interested in this particular data set. So I've created coding schemes about those two aspects of the data that I'm interested in. The coding schemes are very flexible in Transana. You can always add new codes. You can merge codes together. You can split codes. There are a whole variety of things that you can do to make your analysis go more smoothly. But in essence, what I do to code in Transana is I make a selection in my data. So there's a selection, and I can, if I right-click this, Transana will play that particular selection and all of that. I'm going to skip that just because we have limited time here. So this particular code is about flipping. They're doing a lesson unit on symmetry. So I'm going to take the symmetry code, and I'm just going to double-click that code. And what you might have noticed is when I double-clicked that code, up here in the visualization window, we had these two bars up here. The first one is math concepts geometry. Remember, when I brought this file into Transana, I gave it the code geometry. I told Transana to code everything, all of the selections I made from this video, with geometry. And we see symmetry, which is the code I double-clicked. That has been applied to this selection as well. And this particular section is about flipping. So I have a code for flipping. I'm going to double-click that code, and we see that this code also gets applied to Transana. I now have the flip code. I'm just going to go to options and turn off quote and clip warnings, because I was testing that yesterday, but I don't really want that on right now. And we'll go to our teaching techniques, and we'll just, for the sake of argument, call that demonstration. So I've applied that set of codes to this particular section of my video. And I'm going to go on and I'm going to make another selection. And we'll call this highlighting, and we'll call this encouraging thinking. And this is about patterns and symmetry. So we can go through, we can apply those codes quite quickly. We go on, and normally when I am doing this process, I'm looking at the video to evaluate what codes are in there. And again, I'm just trying to move quickly for the sake of demonstration in the webinar. This usually takes a little bit longer than that. So here, specifically, they're getting into the definition of symmetrical. So they're talking about definition. And so you can see that you can go through quite quickly, and you can make selections in your transcript. You can apply codes to that. And what does that mean in terms of our analysis? Well, if I look in here, we can see that I now have three what Transana calls clips. I've done coding on three areas. Those translate to those clips. I'm going to load one of those clips, and we see that what I have here is the codes that I had selected. This reflects the selection that I made in the transcript. If I tell Transana to play that,
I'm going to flip this one up. Maybe. There, I'm going to flip that one up, and I'm going to flip this one down. Same. Okay. What did we find out?
They're the same.
And up, listen.
so I have it. It has all of the appearance of being a selection of just that portion of the media file with its associated transcript, which has had these particular codes applied to it. I select a different clip. We look at that clip.
Okay. And then do an up, down, flip on. Oh,
We see it's a different selection in the media file. It's got different transcript. It's got different coding. So I end up with these selections that have coding applied to them. And as you go through and work with your data, you make lots of selections and end up with lots of coded selections from your data that you can then work with to evaluate, to assess, to analyze that data. So that's one of the ways one works with data in Transana in these early stages, is the process of coding. You create a coding scheme, you apply those codes to selections in your media file. So let's go ahead and go back to our source. So I've just told Transana to look this particular selection up in the video that it came from. So it's going back to the context for that video, and he's showing me the whole video now. So coding is one way that one works with Transana, but Transana is designed to work with lots of different qualitative methodologies. Different methodologies have different needs. Transana is designed to work with lots of different researchers. I've worked with thousands of researchers over the years that I've been developing this software, and I find that there are several different ways that researchers approach data. So Transana gives you several different ways of approaching analysis so that you can find the one that fits the way that you think the best. And so coding is one of those ways, but it's not the only way. There's a second process called categorization, where in essence, you can create collections, you can put selections into those collections, and you can manipulate data in those collections in a way that leads to analysis. I find that the best way to describe that is just to talk about a sample of an analysis that I did. So I was looking at an advertising campaign, and I was interested in the argumentation process. I was interested in how these advertisers were going to convince me to part with my money in exchange for their product. And so I got a set of ads together, and I started looking at that. And anything that I found interesting in those ads, I created a selection, and I put it into my argumentation collection. And by the time I'd analyzed about 6 or 7 ads, I looked at all of the bits that I had gathered together, and I noticed that there were really 2 things going on in those clips that I'd gathered together. There was absolutely what I called logical argumentation. People were making statements about you should buy this product because it accomplishes this task, it allows you to do this thing, that is a thing that you need to do. And it was an appeal to your brain about why spending money on their product made sense. It was a logical argument, and it allowed you to make a business decision, if you will, about the purchase that they were interested in. But I noticed there were a whole bunch of other things that didn't fall into that particular pattern. There were, pictures of adolescents saying, "Oh, this product is really, really cool, and all of my friends are jealous." And the sort of bigger, stronger, faster, sexier. This product allows you, has all of these great properties, and it'll make you popular, and your teeth will be whiter, and you'll do better in dating, and all of this other stuff. which was not what this product was about at all. The product was a computer. But there was one person talking about with tremendous excitement about how they could now do their homework on the beach. That made no sense to me because when I go to the beach, I want to not be doing schoolwork or work. I want to be enjoying myself at the beach, but that's just me. So I termed those things emotional arguments. Those were arguments that were designed not to appeal to your brain, but to appeal to your emotions as a reason for buying their product. And so I sorted out, I took all of the clips that I had and I sorted them into these two categories. And then as I went on, I saw that there were several different logical arguments being made, and there were a number of different types of emotional argumentation going on. And so I ended up with this nested collection structure that had all of these clips in it. The clips were the evidence. The collections were my theoretical understanding of how this advertising campaign worked. So I developed a theory as represented by these nested collections with evidence for, or sometimes contrasting examples against particular parts of my theory to support those different categories. And so I moved my collections into those categories because Transana makes it really easy to move things from one collection to another as you manipulate the data to express that understanding in a particular fashion. So that is very, very briefly the process of categorization that one can do. It is sort of more visual. It's more concrete. It's a little bit, that relationship between theory and evidence is really, really clear with this particular method, while with coding, it takes some extra steps to see that relationship. So there's some advantages to coding. There's some advantages to categorization. And as I say, there are a number of different reasons one would choose one over the other. Although I will also say that over the years, what I have found is that I use different techniques at different times during the analytic process as well. That early on in an analysis where I don't really know where my data is going to take me, I don't know what my data has to say, I do a lot of coding and I review that coding to see what's in my data that is of interest. But as I start to understand the data, as I start to develop a theoretical understanding of what the data has to tell me, I tend to represent that theoretical understanding through categorization, and I tend to shift my coded clips into those categories as I understand them. So I shift from a coding approach to a categorization approach as I understand my data better. And again, this is my particular analytic process with my theoretical orientation and the way my brain works, so that by the time I'm ready to write up my results, I have a set of collections that represents the themes that I want to talk about in my analytic write-up, with all of my clips, which are the quotes that I'm including in my write-up to support each of those themes. And so I'm able to organize my data in the collection structure in a way that makes writing up a little bit easier because of the way I've organized my data within Transana. So coding and categorization are two techniques that are available within Transana to make the whole process go a little bit more smoothly. I'm going to digress just for a second here. What I'm doing is pulling up a browser, and I've gone to the Transana website. If you go to the Learn Transana menu on the Transana website, you'll find the Transana tutorial. The tutorial lays out a tremendous amount of detail in what you need to learn to use Transana. There are all these sections that describe the different parts of the analytic process and that cover, there's a section on if you're working with text and if you're working with still images, and if you're working with media files, you work with media files with transcripts and media files without transcripts, and tons of detail and lots of different pages. And if you look at if you look at the tutorial, you'll find coding and categorization and sections that describe the two approaches and when it makes sense to use one and when it makes sense to use another, and how you select and code with text data or with media data or with still image data, how you select and categorize with text data, with media data. So there's a tremendous amount of additional detail. I'm going over all of this really quickly, but the Transana tutorial, which you get to from the website, allows you to explore all of this in a much greater level of detail and make more sense out of it. But those two tools work together to allow you to generate understanding of your data. But there are additional tools that further that understanding that, for example, I have here a collection called Presidential Debate Questions. I recorded the US presidential debates in 2012, 2016, 2008, 2012, 2016. And I created selections for all of the questions asked by journalists. I didn't want to look at candidate behavior. I wanted to look at journalist behavior and ask the question, did the journalists change how they acted across those three election cycles? And so I created a bunch of clips. These are all of the questions asked by journalists for each of the 3 years. And so how did I approach answering the question about journalist behavior based on that? I used what Transana calls the word frequency report. The word frequency report allows me to look at what was the language used by my participants during the data that I collected. And we can see that what we have here is all of the words in descending order of use by the journalists. And I can create a word cloud, which creates a picture of what that looked like. So for 2008, there were the word senators very large because both candidates were senators at the time. And so that was part of every reference they made included the word senator. But we can see things here, security and crisis and campaigns and health and economic. And so we can see and troops and the country, and we see a lot of questions that are essentially policy oriented issues. By the time we get to 2016, if we do a word frequency report and we look at the words here, we see a kind of a different issue. It's about debate, and it's about questions, and it's about the election, and it's about what we want, and it's about plans. You don't see the same level of policy in the discussion in 2016. We see that the journalists were using very different language in their questions in 2016 than they were in 2008 and 2012. That things had moved from policy-oriented discussions in presidential debates to things that were more about personality and scandal and really were not focused on concrete policies and about what a person was going to act like as president in the same terms at all. So there is this report that allows you to explore the language used in your data, what words people are using, what concepts are important to them, and to visualize that. So that's one sort of report. There are text-based reports. So if I go back to my, let's go here and ask for a collection report. A collection report is a text-based report. This shows me all of the clips that I have gathered together in this particular collection. Each clip has a hyperlink, so I can load the underlying data. I can watch my media file to understand exactly what's coming together in this report. It gives me what data file did this come from. If it's a media file, it gives me the transcript represented by this selection. It shows me the coding for that selection, and it shows all of those selections that I've made, and it allows me to link immediately with a single click back to my original data to make sure that I understand all of those elements. And it gives me this summary at the end that shows me what codes are brought together. It gives me a bar graph that shows me that information. And so there's lots of, this might be a better example of a report. I think this is the one I was thinking of. Yeah. So it actually, I did a screenshot from the video to create this diagram of what students understood and did not understand about symmetry. Just the quick overview of this is the student was asked to identify lines of symmetry in a particular shape. The student identified two correctly, which are the green lines, but the student identified as lines of symmetry diagonals, which are in fact not lines of symmetry. So this shows what a student understood and what a student had not yet figured out about the concept that was being taught at that time. And so this shows a mistake that a particular student was making. It demonstrates it in graphical form, and it allowed the researchers to adjust their curriculum to address this particular issue that they were seeing in the data. Again, you see what other coding comes together with this and get a bar graph of what that coding is like. So there are text-based reports that allow you to make sense out of your data and to make connections across data. There are graphical reports. Here's some video gameplay data for a conference that I was working on. I collected some data to try and describe video game play and what the educational values were of that. And when I took my data and I manipulated it in particular ways, I looked at just some of the variables and I set the order. Transana showed me this particular graph that allowed me to see that the gameplay that I was looking at occurred in three distinct phases. That there was one thing going on during this first 8 minutes. There was a second thing going on from 8 minutes to maybe 12 minutes, and then a third thing going on from 12 minutes to the end of the game. So it allowed me to see a pattern in my data that I had not been able to see just by working the data and going through and coding the data. It was only when I created this map of the coding that it showed me these three distinct phases very clearly. And this particular game was one of those first-person shooter games. So each of these bars represents, excuse me, a player life. This game, the player had 28 rounds from getting a character created to going out into the play environment, to having that character killed and starting over again. 28 rounds of life in 24 minutes. Average length of life was about 35 seconds. You can see there were short lives and there were long lives. I was able to click on the bars in this graph to play each of those lives. I played the short lives, I played the long lives. I was able to get a sense of what was different about those two that allowed the player to survive longer sometimes than others. I was able also to say that short lives versus long lives didn't really change across the different strategies involved in these three different phases. But I can also take the data for this and I can look at it from a different aspect. This is one view of the data that tells one story about what was going on. But I created, through the tools in Transana and its ability to manipulate coding, I was able to create a different view. This is a very different view of that same data, just with looking at different codes, and it tells a different story about the online chat that was going on behind the gameplay. I don't have time to go into it, but this tells the story of a group of people who you go into a room full of adolescent males who are playing a shooter game and say, I'm recording some data for a conference. There was a subsection of them that decided that that was their opportunity to spoil my data by being as inappropriate as possible. And then there were other players in the game who actually did a lot of work to try and get that inappropriateness to stop. And you can see that the inappropriateness did in fact fade out over the course of the gameplay that was recorded. So this actually shows the interaction between those two groups of players and how they were dealing with this issue of player behavior related to being recorded for a conference. And so that's just a different view of the same data that I was able to create these different views using the filter tool that Transana gives me, allowing me to control what gets shown in what order. You can see for this one, there are these 3 chat items selected. If I go and load the other one, it shows a different set of keywords selected in a different order with a different color scheme. And that gives me the different view of the data. So you can create these views of the data. So you can use Transana's reports to tell stories about what's in your data, to explain the findings in your data. And so there are text-based reports, there are visually based reports. There are a number of tools. There are some tools that allow you to look even at coding across different media files to look at data either longitudinally or at least compare it in a comparison format, looking at different videos that are theoretically of the same thing, but where differences in coding might allow you to gain insight into differences in what's going on in that data. Transana also offers searches. So if we want to know what do 3rd graders know about pi, I can go to my math concepts of pi and I can do a quick search. And what Transana returns is, because this was all video-based data, Transana returns clips in collections that tell a story. And if I went here and chose play all clips, Transana would play me these 6 clips because there was a narrative element to the way I did my analysis. These 6 clips played in order tell the story of the students and what they understand about pi. In students explain what they find. They say that pi is equal to 3. They adjust that to it's between 3.1 and 3.2. And then they do presentations to the class where they say the relationship between circumference and diameter is exactly 3, unless you have measurement error. So it explains exactly what those 3rd graders understand about the concept of pi across 6 relatively short video clips. So the search allows me to tell a story. Now that was a simple search that just used a single term, but Transana offers more complex searches where you can combine multiple terms, you can combine text, you can use actual words in the data, words and phrases as expressed in text. You can look at collection membership. You can look at the combination of all of those different elements to do complex searches and really get a good understanding of exactly what your data is going to show you. And again, it always returns data elements within collections in this tree structure that's very similar to the way things are represented in the data window. These are experimental. If I restart Transana now, this will disappear, although I do have the option of converting this set of search results to a collection, because that's one of the ways that one represents permanently something one has discovered in Transana. So there are a variety of reports and maps and graphs and searches and reports on your search results and all of that that allow you to make sense out of your data that you have coded and categorized. The last thing I want to talk about in the last couple of minutes is writing tools. Transana provides a variety of writing tools. You've probably all heard of analytic memos and been told that one should create analytic memos for all of the elements one creates when doing analysis. And Transana has tools that allow you, let me see if I can find the right example. Yeah, you can attach a note to every single selection that you make that describes what does that particular selection mean? Why did you start it where you started it and end it where you ended it? Why did you code it the way you coded it? You can create notes that describe what does a particular collection mean. When you group things together, what is the meaning of that grouping? And you can use the notes to reflect how does the meaning of that grouping change as you do your analysis and learn things about your data and understand your data differently. So there are ways of attaching data to all of the individual elements that you're working with as you work in Transana, but there are also ways of doing larger scale writing. So I create a library called research journals, and I do a number of things with research journals. First off, I keep a daily progress log. Every time I go into a database to do some analysis, the first thing that I do is go to daily progress and I talk about what am I going to do today? What's my goal today? What am I looking at today and why? And as I finish for the day, I go back to daily progress and I say, this is what I accomplished. This is what I discovered. These are the questions that I have. These are ideas that I want to follow up on. So I have lots of notes to myself to have continuity from one session to the next during my analysis by taking those progress notes. I actually begin, to back up, I create research journals for the different research questions that I have, so that as I work on particular research questions, I can document what my progress is and what I'm discovering and how that all works. When it comes time to write up my analysis, I start my results write up in Transana. And the primary, I don't have an example, a real example that I can show you because of data confidentiality, and I don't have permission to share any of the data sets that I've worked on that have turned into actual articles. But you can create links in your write-up. So I can be writing up something that I've discovered about a particular clip, and I want to drop that quote into my write-up. I can include a link that allows me to click on that quote in my write-up, and Transana loads the quote, loads that portion of the
We
video
want you to
so that
take.
I can play it so that I can make sure that I have the quote accurately, and I can make sure that the quote really does say exactly what I think that quote means in my write-up phase, since I might have made that selection 6 months ago or more. I can, if I'm writing up some theoretical aspect of something I've discovered, I can include a link to the note that describes how a collection is used and how the meaning of that collection has changed with time, so that I can make sure that that gets reflected accurately in my results write-up. So I do my first draft of my results write-up with my quotes and with my themes and with my description of how I got to the conclusions that I got to, all reflected from my data, with all of that data just being a click away, even from that first draft results write-up. Now, when I export that results write-up to be able to bring it over into a word processor and integrate it with the rest of my analytic writing, I lose those links because Word doesn't know from what is a clip in Transana. But to have all of those links embedded in my write-up during that initial draft is really, really nice, particularly when I'm in a collaborative situation, when I'm working with others on that writing, to make sure that others can see the data behind the particular quotes that I chose, and so they can make sure that they agree with my interpretation and with those selections. So that really, really quickly shows all a lot of about working with Transana and the kinds of things one can do. I'm happy to hang out for a while and answer questions as people have questions. Thank you all very much for coming. I know I went kind of fast, but there was a lot of ground to cover, and it is a challenge to get through all of these concepts in an hour. Looks like our hour is just finishing. So what questions do people have about anything that I talked about? Is there a plan to make Transana available on operating systems other than Windows? Transana is available on Windows and Mac. I don't plan to make a Linux version of it. First off, because Linux has some difficulties handling video, particularly the way Transana needs to. So when I've experimented with it, I've gotten mixed results. And second off, there really isn't a market. The time that it would take to create a Linux version of Transana, I would never get paid back for that time. And ultimately, writing Transana is how I make my living. My cats want to eat every day, and a Linux version of Transana is not economically viable. Um, uh, there is a program out there called Quirkos, and Quirkos originally released Windows, Mac, and Linux versions. And I was talking to their developer about 3 years after their initial release, and I asked him if anybody had ever bought the Linux version, and he said that he was the only person he knew who used the Linux version. And so you were, I think, the fourth person in 20 years who's asked about a Linux version of Transana. Any other questions? So either everything made perfect sense and you all know now what you need to know to go on and do analysis, or I completely lost you. Uh, okay, so Carlos is, yeah. Yeah, go ahead and share your screen, Carlos. That would be fine. So one of the things that you're having trouble with is that your files cannot be found. Um, uh, One of the things that I would suggest for that is make sure that you are using the media library setting. If you go to, on Windows, it's Options, Program Settings. On the Mac, it's Transana Preferences. But you can define your media library directory. That's the directory where Transana should look for your media files. You can have subdirectories off of that, but defining that media library can be really helpful. That helps Transana know where to look to find your media files. What sometimes happens is people move where they store a file, or if they're using an external drive, that external drive gets assigned a different drive letter on Windows for some reason. Those kinds of issues come up that make it a little bit harder for Transana to find where the files were. And so so there are some things that you can do like that. I would have to look at the way you have things set up to know the specifics of that. I know that on my computer, my set of development computers, Transana is really good about finding the files, but I know that there are certain things that can happen that make it harder. Transana just includes a pointer that is the path and the file name. And if that path and file name changes, then it won't be able to find the file. The other thing that can happen is that sometimes people are able to get automated transcripts of files that are in a format that Transana doesn't actually support. MOV is an example. People with older MOV files, you're able to get transcripts from them even though Transana can't play that format. And so those files sometimes need to go through the media conversion tool to be playable, even though they worked for automated transcription. So again, I would have to look at some of the specifics of what's going on for you to be able to answer that question. But it's generally something specific has happened that makes Transana unable to find those files. Yeah, Carlos, why don't you hang around a little while and we'll investigate that further after everybody else is done. Nicolo, you were curious about the search matrix. Is it possible to do a quick demonstration? You bet. So if I go to search and I choose search matrix, the search matrix allows you to define sets of searches, searches in rows, searches in columns, and Transana shows you the results of the combinations of those searches. That can be a little bit complicated. I'm going to use American football data as the simplest data set that I have that allows us to explore that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define some rows. Using my football data, I'm going to do a search for game one. And the gold team for the first row. I'm going to do a search for game two and the gold team for the second row. I'm going to search for game three and the gold team for my third row. So I've got now 3 rows in my search matrix that basically look at a single team and a different game for each team. And now I'm going to add my columns. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for what are all the plays that resulted in a touchdown. Back up, get the correct. So what touchdowns did the gold team get in those first 3 games? I'm going to add that as a column. So here's a list of all of the touchdowns across all games. Here's the first game's touchdowns, the second game's touchdowns, the third game's touchdowns. I'm going to add another column. I'm going to look for, let's say, completed passes. And so here are the completed passes for the first game, the second game, the third game. You can see they only had 1 completed pass in that first game. Each of these, let's pick this one. If I load that particular video, then in Transana's main interface, this might take a second because this is data I haven't looked at in a little while. So here,
First and 10 on the Regent 45.
Get there, go!
the Bears Earl scoring a touchdown in the third game. So the search matrix allows me to do those sorts of rows and columns. For each cell, I get things like a collection report, a word frequency report, and play all clips. So if I came to this cell and chose play all clips, then it would show this whole set of completed passes that happened. This is the completed passes column in the second game row. They passed a lot in that game successfully. And so we could see all of those completed passes. So I actually went over all of this data with the coaches and helped them understand a little bit about the dynamics of what their team was doing well and what their team needed to work on. And using the search matrix allowed us to slice and dice it up into different categories. So not necessarily an academic use demonstration with academic type data, but I think this data makes it easy to see what the search matrix does. Does that answer your questions, or did you have specific questions beyond that? All right. Any additional questions then before we wrap things up? All right, well, thank you all for coming. Carlos, why don't you hang on for a little bit? We'll share your screen and take a look at things. I say thank you very much to the rest of you for coming. I hope this webinar has been helpful. And I will send out a link to the recording, like I said, sometime in the next couple of hours.